The doctors were very clear. No travel, no stress, no public appearances. Fred Rogers had stomach cancer, advanced, aggressive. His body was failing in ways that terrified even him, a man who had spent his entire life teaching children not to be afraid. He was 73 years old. He'd retired from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood just 6 months earlier. After 33 years, 895 episodes, and countless children's lives changed, he'd finally hung up his cardigan. He was supposed to be resting, spending time with his family, preparing for what everyone knew was coming, but no one wanted to say out loud he was dying. And he was supposed to be doing it quietly. Then September 11th happened. It was a Tuesday morning. Fred Rogers was in his home in Pittsburgh, having breakfast with his wife, Joanne. The television was on in the background, something they rarely did, but Joanne had wanted to catch the weather report. Then the first plane hit. Fred and Joanne sat frozen as the second plane struck, as the towers fell, as the Pentagon burned, as Flight 93 crashed in a field in Pennsylvania less than 80 miles from where they sat. The world was ending on live television. And all Fred Rogers could think about was the children. The children watching this. The children whose parents were in those buildings. The children whose parents were firefighters and police officers running toward the danger. The children who would go to school tomorrow and not understand why the adults were crying. The children who would be afraid. So terribly, utterly afraid. Someone needs to talk to them, Fred said quietly. Joanne looked at her husband. She knew that tone. She'd been married to him for 43 years. She knew what was coming next. Fred, no. Someone needs to tell them it's going to be okay. Fred, you can't. The doctors said no stress. No. Joanne, children are watching their world fall apart on television. Their parents are terrified. Who's going to tell them how to feel? Who's going to help them understand? Not you. Fred, you're sick. She couldn't say the word. Dying. But they both knew it. Fred Rogers reached across the table and took his wife's hand. I might be dying, Joanne, but those children are living, and they're scared. And if I can help them, even just a little bit, even just one more time, I have to try. Joanne Rogers looked at her husband, the man who had never, not once in 33 years, turned away from a child who needed him. She knew she couldn't stop him. She'd never been able to stop him when children needed help. So she just held his hand and cried. Within hours of the attacks, the calls started coming to Fred Rogers' home. PBS executives, producers, former colleagues, all saying the same thing. Fred, we need you. The children need you. Can you do something? Anything? Fred's cancer specialist called too. Fred's assistant had reached out, asking if it would be medically safe for Fred to make a brief public statement. The answer was firm. Absolutely not. Mr. Rogers is in no condition to work. Any stress could accelerate the disease. He needs complete rest. Fred Rogers called them back himself. I'm going to do this, he said simply. Mr. Rogers, I strongly advise. I understand. But I'm going to do this anyway. On September 14th, 2001, 3 days after the towers fell, Fred Rogers got dressed. Joanne helped him. His hands were shaking too much to manage the buttons on his shirt. The cancer had stolen so much from him already. His strength, his energy, his appetite, but not his purpose. Never his purpose. He put on a blue cardigan, the same style he'd worn for 33 years. But this one was special. It had been knitted by his mother before she died. He'd been saving it. He wasn't sure for what. Now he knew. Joanne drove him to the WQED studios in Pittsburgh, the same studio where Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood had been filmed for decades. The same studio he'd walked away from 6 months earlier, thinking he'd never come back. The crew was waiting. They'd set up a simple backdrop. A chair, a camera. Nothing fancy. Nothing elaborate. Just Fred Rogers. And his message. When the crew saw him walk in, several of them started crying. He looked so different from when they'd last seen him. Thinner, frailer. The cancer was visible now in the hollows of his cheeks, the way his clothes hung loose on his frame. But his eyes were the same, kind, steady, present. "Thank you for doing this, Fred," the director said, his voice thick with emotion. Fred just smiled. "This is where I'm supposed to be." They helped him into the chair. He took a moment to catch his breath. Even that short walk from the door to the set had exhausted him. But when the camera turned on, something happened. Fred Rogers sat up a little straighter. The tremor in his hand steadied. His voice, which had been weak and raspy just moments before, became clear. He looked directly into the camera, and he spoke to the children. "Hello, friends. You've been seeing some very scary things on television these past few days. Buildings falling down, fires, people running, people crying. And you might be feeling scared too. That's okay. It's okay to feel scared when scary things happen. I want you to know that there are many, many people who are working very hard to help. Firefighters and police officers and doctors and nurses. They're helpers. And in times like these, we can always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers. And you know what else? The people who love you are still here. Your parents, your teachers, your neighbors, they're all still here. And they're going to take care of you. They're going to make sure you're safe. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel scared. All of those feelings are okay. They're part of being human. And the people who love you want to know how you're feeling, so they can help you. Talk to the grown-ups you trust about how you're feeling. Draw pictures about it. Play about it. That's how children work through their feelings, through play and through talking. And remember this, you are special. You are loved. And the world is still full of good people who care about you. This scary thing happened. But we're going to get through it. Together. Because that's what neighbors do. We help each other. We take care of each other. And I'm very proud to be your neighbor. I'll see you soon." The recording lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, Fred Rogers slumped back in the chair, completely exhausted. The crew rushed over with water, with a blanket. Several of them were openly weeping. "Was that okay?" Fred asked weakly. The director couldn't even speak. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face. They helped Fred to a couch in the green room. He lay there for 20 minutes, too weak to move. Joanne sat beside him, holding his hand. "You did it," she whispered. "I had to," he whispered back. The message aired that night. And the next day. And the day after that. PBS sent it to every affiliate station in the country, with instructions. Air this as often as you need to. No restrictions. No limits. The children need it. It was broadcast before, after, and during children's programming. Some stations ran it every hour. Schools played it in classrooms. Libraries played it on loop. Parents recorded it on VHS tapes and played it for their children over and over. The letters started, arriving almost immediately. Thousands of them. Then tens of thousands. Parents writing to say thank you. Teachers saying their students had finally been able to talk about their feelings after watching. Therapists saying the message had helped traumatize children more than anything else they'd tried. And children. So many children. Drawing pictures for Mr. Rogers. Telling him they loved him. Telling him they weren't as scared anymore. Fred Rogers read every letter he could. But he was getting weaker. By October, he was in the hospital more often than not. The cancer was winning, but he'd done it. One more time. One last time. He'd been there when the Children needed him. What no one knew, what even Joanne didn't fully understand until later, was that Fred Rogers had made a choice that day in September. His oncologist explained it to Joanne months afterward. When Fred was gone, the stress of doing that recording, of traveling to the studio, of pushing himself when his body was already failing, it accelerated everything. The cancer became more aggressive. The timeline shortened. Joanne stared at the doctor. "You're saying that going to the studio made him die faster?" "Yes, probably by several months. The stress, the exertion, it was too much for his system." Joanne Rogers sat very still for a moment. Then she said quietly, "He knew. He knew it would cost him time. And he did it anyway." The doctor nodded. "Yes, I believe he did." Fred Rogers spent the fall and winter of 2001 in and out of hospitals. The cancer was relentless. The treatments were brutal, but he never regretted September 14th, not once. When people came to visit him in the hospital, when they said, "You shouldn't have pushed yourself like that. You should have rested. You should have thought about yourself," Fred would just smile that gentle smile and say, "The children needed someone to tell them it was going to be okay. I couldn't say no to that." In January of 2002, Fred Rogers was admitted to the hospital for what would be the last time. The cancer had spread everywhere. There was nothing more to be done. His family gathered. His friends came to say goodbye. Former colleagues, people whose lives he'd touched, they all came to sit with him in those final weeks. One day, a package arrived. It was from PBS. Inside was a compilation tape, dozens of letters and drawings from children. Responding to his 9/11's message, someone set up a small TV in Fred's hospital room and played it for him. He was too weak to sit up. So Joanne held his hand and described what was on the screen. A 6-year-old's crayon drawing of Mr. Rogers with the caption, "You made me not scared." A letter from a 9-year-old. "My dad is a firefighter. He was at the towers. He's okay. Thank you for telling me to look for helpers. My dad is a helper." A class photo from a kindergarten in New York with a banner. "We love you, Mr. Rogers. You helped us be brave." Joanne watched her husband's face as she read. Tears were running down his cheeks. "It mattered, Fred," she whispered. "What you did mattered." Fred squeezed her hand. It was all the strength he had left. "Good," he whispered. "That's all I wanted." Fred Rogers died on February 27, 2003. Just 17 months after September 11. At his funeral, someone mentioned the 9/11's message. How it had been his last public act. How he'd come out of retirement one final time to help frightened children. What they didn't mention, while most people still don't know what it cost him, that Fred Rogers had traded months of his own life for 3 minutes of comfort for millions of children. That he'd known it would hurt him, known it would accelerate his death. And he'd done it anyway, because that's who Fred Rogers was. He wasn't a saint. He didn't have superpowers. He was just a man who believed more than anything else in the world that children mattered, that their feelings mattered, that their fear and confusion and pain deserved to be acknowledged and addressed. And he lived that belief right up until the moment he died. The 9/11's message still exists. You can find it online. 3 minutes and 20 seconds of a dying man telling children that it's going to be okay. If you watch it knowing what we know now, that Fred Rogers recorded it while dying of cancer, that it cost him months of his life, that it was his final gift to the children he'd served for 33 years. It hits differently. You can see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he's gripping the arms of the chair a little too tightly, the slight tremor in his hands, but you can also see the love, the determination, the absolute refusal to let children suffer alone if he could, do anything at all, to help. Asterisk in the years since Fred Rogers died, people have asked, do you think he regretted it? Giving up those final months? Joanne Rogers always gave the same answer. Fred never counted time in months or years. He counted it in moments that mattered. And September 14th, 2001 was a moment that mattered. Those 3 minutes reached millions of children who were terrified, who needed to hear that someone understood their fear and that it was going to be okay. She would pause, her eyes distant with memory. He told me once, near the end, Joanne, I've lived 73 years. That's a gift. But if I can use one of those years to help children feel less afraid, that's not a sacrifice. That's a privilege. There's a moment in the 9/11's message that most people don't notice the first time they watch it. Near the end, Fred Rogers looks directly into the camera and says, "And I'm very proud to be your neighbor." His voice cracks slightly on the word neighbor, because Fred Rogers knew something the children watching didn't know. He was saying goodbye, not just for now, not just until the next episode. Forever. He was dying. And he knew it. And he'd come to say goodbye in the only way he knew how, by one more time, one last time, telling children that they mattered, that they were loved, that they were going to be okay, even if he wasn't. The last thing Fred Rogers did before leaving the studio that day in September was ask to see the crew one more time. They gathered around camera operators, sound technicians, producers, people who had worked with him for decades. He was sitting on the couch, too weak to stand. But he looked at each of them. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for helping me do this one more time." The director, a man named Bill Eiler, who had worked with Fred for 20 years, couldn't hold it together anymore. "Fred, you didn't have to do this. You should be resting. You should be—" Fred held up a hand, stopping him. "Bill, do you remember what we always said? That every episode we made was for one child? The one child who needed to hear exactly what we were saying that day." Bill nodded, unable to speak. Today, that one child is every child. Every child in America who is scared. Every child who doesn't understand what's happening. Every child who needs someone to tell them it's going to be okay. Fred's voice was getting weaker, but he pushed through. "If I can be that voice, even just one more time, then this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." He paused, gathering the last of his strength. "This is what I'm for." Fred Rogers spent his entire life believing that he was put on this earth for one purpose: to help children feel loved, valued, and safe. He never wavered from that purpose. Not when it was hard. Not when it cost him. Not even when it was literally killing him. On September 14th, 2001, when the world was on fire and children everywhere were terrified, Fred Rogers made a choice. He could rest, preserve his strength, hold on to those final precious months with his family. Or he could do what he'd always done: put on his cardigan, look into the camera, and tell children that it was going to be okay. It wasn't a hard choice for Fred Rogers. It wasn't even really a choice at all. It was just who he was. Asterisk. The cardigan he wore that day, the blue one his mother had made, is now in the Smithsonian Institution. Next to it is a small placard that reads, "Worn by Fred Rogers during his final public message to children." Recorded September 14th, 2001. What? The placard doesn't say is that 3 minutes of footage cost a man 4 months of his life. That Fred Rogers knew the price and paid it willingly. That he traded his own tomorrow so that millions of children could feel safe today. That's not in the placard, but it should be, because that's the real story of the last time Fred Rogers put on his cardigan. Not that he did it, but what it cost him to do it, and that he paid that cost without hesitation, without complaint, without regret, because there were children who needed him, and Fred Rogers never not once in his entire life said no to a child who needed him, even when saying yes meant dying sooner, even when saying yes meant leaving his wife, his children, his grandchildren earlier than he had to. Even then, he said yes, because that's what love looks like when it's real, when it's not about what you can afford to give, but about giving what you can't afford not to. Fred Rogers couldn't afford to give those months. He desperately needed them. His family needed them, but the children needed him more, and so he gave. He gave until there was nothing left to give, and then he gave one more time. On February 27, 2003, surrounded by his family, Fred Rogers died. His last words to Joanne were simple. "I'm not afraid." She held his hand. "I know, sweetheart." The children, are they okay? Even at the very end, even in his final moments, he was thinking about the children. "Yes, Fred, the children are okay." He made sure of that. He smiled. That gentle, peaceful smile that had comforted millions. Good, that's good. And then he was gone. In the days after Fred Rogers died, the tributes poured in. Presidents and celebrities and educators and parents. Everyone had a story about how Fred Rogers had changed their life. But there was one tribute that stood out. It came from a teacher in New York City. She'd been in the classroom on September 11th when the towers fell. She'd had to evacuate her students, some of whom had parents in the towers. She wrote, "I didn't know what to say to my students. How do you explain something that evil, that's senseless, to 7-year-olds? I was terrified I would say the wrong thing and make it worse. Then someone showed me Mr. Rogers' message. We watched it together, and I watched my students, these children who had been silent with shock and fear, start to cry, and then start to talk, and then start to heal. Mr. Rogers gave us the words we needed. He gave us permission to be scared and sad. He reminded us to look for the helpers. He told us it was going to be okay. And because he said it, we believed it. I learned later that he was dying when he recorded that message, that he came out of retirement against doctor's orders to help us. I want his family to know. He didn't just help. He saved us. He saved my students. He saved me, and I will spend the rest of my career trying to be even a fraction of the helper he was. That's the legacy of September 14th, 2001. Not just 3 minutes of video. But the choice behind it. The sacrifice no one saw. The love that said, "I'm dying, but you're scared, so I'm coming." The last time Fred Rogers put on his cardigan wasn't for fame. It wasn't for recognition. It wasn't for legacy. It was for the same reason he put it on every single day for 33 years. Because there were children who needed to know they mattered. And Fred Rogers would rather die than let a child feel alone. So he didn't die in his bed, resting peacefully. He died having given everything, literally everything, including months of his own life, to make sure children felt safe and loved. And if you ask me, there's no better way for Fred Rogers to have gone doing exactly what he was meant to do, being exactly who he was meant to be, loving children with every last breath he had.